YWCA Hartford Region Community Matters podcast, where the matters of the community are the topic of conversation, with your host, Tiffany Young. Community Matters. Well, good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to Community Matters Podcast, hosted by the YWCA Hartford Region, where today's topic is breaking the silence and unmasking human trafficking. This is a very important conversation today, and perhaps a bit uncomfortable, but a needed conversation. Allow me to introduce Shania Myers, our online moderator for today's discussion. And our in studio guest today, we have Taisha Blue of Perfectly Imperfect and Miss Jermika Koss of the Hummingbird Project. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what drew you to this such important work.
All right. So glad to be here. I am a native of the state of Connecticut, born and raised. And about 12 years ago, I traveled down to Atlanta for a conference. And there was a woman there that talked about human trafficking. And I thought, oh, okay, we're just going to get informed about stuff happening overseas. And the more she talked and began to share how it was happening in Atlanta, I thought, oh, I need to learn more about this. And I left Atlanta on a journey, on a quest to come to Connecticut and find out, oh, is this an issue also happening in our area? I called the state of Connecticut and they gave me a number of one of my greatest mentors. Shout out to Anne-Marie Boulay, founder of the Underground, New England. They gave me her number 12 years ago, and that's all it's been written. I studied, like as same thing as Taisha said, self-study, get certifications, connecting in the existing movement, because there is a movement that's happening in the anti-trafficking work, respecting those places, and then finding where there was a gap. And so that's how we ended up landing in the seat of the Hummingbird Project, of really filling a gap in need that we found to be prevalent, not only in our area, but nationwide.
Wow. Well, I appreciate the passion of both of you ladies.
Thank you.
A big part of why we're even here today having this conversation. So let's go ahead and dig right into it. You know, many people have a misconception about what human trafficking looks like. And how can you explain what human trafficking really is and the different forms it takes, and particularly how it varies across different regions, including our community right here in the Hartford region? Taisha, I'll go ahead and start with you.
Okay, I think one of the biggest misconceptions, which is also a stigma, is when we hear human trafficking, is like we think of the movie Taken, or we think of white vans with tinted windows. Although there are parts of the movie where those situations do occur. Do people who traffic have vans with tinted windows? Yes, but that's not any person that you see out on the street that has a white van with tinted windows. They're a trafficker. And I think that's a stigma associated with human trafficking. Also, human trafficking is not a look. You can't look at someone and say, oh, they would never do that. You can't look at a judge. You can't look at a police officer. You can't look at a doctor and say they would never do something like that because of what they look like. Because actually, those are a lot of those professions are traffickers. Women are traffickers. Men are traffickers. Young women are traffickers. Young men are traffickers. The younger generation. So the misconception is that it's a look. It's only certain people, when you really don't know who you're sitting next to, who you're talking to, that is actually the trafficker.
Wow.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Jermika, chime in, please.
Yeah, I'll also say, just for clarity's sake, of what is human trafficking, because sometimes that is a big barrier of understanding what it is. But human trafficking can be labor trafficking or sex trafficking. With sex trafficking, it's a commercial sex act in exchange of something of value, by a force, fraud, or coercion. Or if a child has not obtained the age of 18, it is automatically deemed trafficking if a child is involved in commercial exploitation or a commercial sex act. In regards to labor trafficking, it's also forced labor or peonage or debt bondage, where someone owes a debt that they can never pay off or paid very nominally or not in alignment with labor laws. And so that happens very frequently and is vastly underreported. And so just clarifying what it is defined federally, it helps us. But then, as Taisha said, what it looks like, it's almost like we have to debunk what we thought in order to understand what it is, in order to apply it and then see it and respond.
Can I just dig a little deeper with the labor trafficking? I'm curious to understand, and probably my viewers too, what is really labor trafficking and how does it show up? How do we identify that? How do we know, oh, okay, that's labor trafficking?
So labor trafficking can look like employment. It kind of coincides with debt bondage as well. So a lot of times, children that not necessarily, I mean, it happens here in our state, but a lot of children are trafficked from out of the country to work here for nothing, pretty much. And in exchange for housing, food, clothes. So they use younger people, and I'll say children too. They use younger people, whether it's men or girls or boys. They use them in for their own selfish reasons. So if they need some work done around the house, or if they need any kind of work done, they traffic these children from out of state, out of the country, and they say, okay, you're going to do this for me, but in exchange, I'm going to give you drugs. I'm going to give you a room to stay in. I'm going to feed you. I'm going to clothe you on my terms, you know. And a lot of times the families that they're taking these children from, unfortunately, don't have the means to, fend for their families.
So is it almost like offering a sense of security?
Yeah.
A false security.
Yeah.
Yeah. That happened. I'm sorry.
No. I just wanted to add, as far as another form of trafficking, we don't really talk about is organ trafficking. And that's a big black market.
Bodily organs.
Organs, livers, kidneys, hearts. A lot of those organs, you have to go on a wait list for. You could be on a wait list for 2 to 7 years, sometimes longer. You know, and a lot of people have kidney failure, so they need kidneys, they need livers, and people are not being properly screened when they die, or people are killed and they're not properly screened medically to have their organs taken, and people are removing their organs and putting them in other people's bodies for money.
Wow.
And so it's something that's not talked about, but it is a form of trafficking.
Wow.
But I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, thank you so much for that insight. Moving on to the local impact and looking at some of our most vulnerable populations, you know, human trafficking often feels like a distant issue. I remember first learning about it, and much of what I learned is from you two young ladies early on. But the truth is, it's happening right here. And it's happening right here in our own communities and right before our eyes. Can you share some statistics and specific to right here in the Hartford region and shed light on who is most vulnerable, such as our Black girls and women in abusive relationships and others who might be very at high risk?
So I know the U.S. Department of Justice has reported that 62% of the population are African American girls. So that was as of 2023. It may have increased. I'm not sure. Jermika may be able to chime in on
that. I don't have insight in regards to that stat because there are a lot of there's a lot of different sources and data, right? But just even in our region in Connecticut, we have done a lot of work, and I just want to just shout out HART, the Human Anti-Response Task Force, a lot of the work that they have done, and that's the DCF's department or establishment, and they have provided us data on the child side because I just want to share. You have domestic child human trafficking, and then you also have it happening to adults, right? And so a lot of the data that you'll find locally and nationally will be regards to children, rightfully so in a sense, because most people are entering these lives of exploitation in their youth, right? Or have
Yes.
had some type of exposure to it. But I'll just give you some data that they have shared with us, the Heart team, and it's in their intro to human trafficking curriculum that we are both licensed in. Uh, in 2023, there were 303 cases here in Connecticut that were reported to DCF. 310 in 2022. Now, these are children. These are large numbers when we think about children being exploited, right? Um, there's another statistic in 2023. The highest known age at the time of exploitation was between 14 and 16. Those were the highest numbers of the known ages here in Connecticut. In regards to those disparities, when we talk about vulnerability, we're always very cognizant and to be respectfully reflective of that trafficking can happen to anyone, right? We know that youth in itself are inherently vulnerable. A youth, let me say that again, in their selves at their age is inherently vulnerable. And so I generally look at it as a meter. So if we were looking at what was compounding in regards to risk, the first thing would be looking at, are they youth? They're instantly vulnerable. So we should be looking for all of our children to be protected from these type of exploitations, right? But then there's some compounding factors, and I'm sure you'll chime in, Taisha. There's some compounding factors that can create more of what I deem as a nucleus of high risk. And that happens many times in the Black and Brown community, and it has been shown by disproportionate numbers of Black and Brown children and adults being trafficked. And when I say disproportionate, that is in comparison to the population within a region or in our nation, it is higher than it should be proportionately
Yes.
to the population.
Yep. And I'm happy you said that.
Mhm.
We have to understand that children are still like mentally and emotionally still developing. So they are easily manipulated. They're able to, they don't know who they are a lot of times at that age. I mean, 12, 13, 14, we're still peer pressure. We're still trying to figure ourselves out. So when we meet people, we think they come off as knowing more than us. And maybe it's someone that we like. Maybe it's someone we think is cute. Maybe it's someone we have a crush on. And so they are easily manipulated into doing anything that they want us to do. Like an example could be, let's say we have 12, like I said, 12 and 13-year-olds. They don't want to be told what to do. They want to feel like they have a say in what time they have to go to sleep, what time, who they can hang with, and where they could go. When you have an adult or an older person in your ear telling you um, how mature you are at that age, oh, you can make the decisions on your own. You don't need your mother or your father to tell you that. You always make good decisions, and you keep hearing that at that age. You want more of that. You don't want to hear what
Yeah.
you're not doing, what you can't do. So when someone's feeding you that information, you're more likely to want to be with that side of things, on that side of. So um I think that we have to keep that in mind, that at that age our children can be easily manipulated, and just making sure that we're, as adults, as parents, that we're doing our part, keeping them involved in some things that can keep them out of the streets, keep them active, keep their minds open, and just teaching them about this human trafficking.
Mm-hmm.
So let me ask you this, Taisha, in your experience, because I know you do a lot of work with youth and you
Yes.
go right to where they are in the
Yep.
schools and the organizations. When you're having these conversations, I'm just curious, what are a lot of the responses of these children? Are these things that are like familiar and that they might have encountered, or, is it familiar to them at all? I'm just
Yes.
curious about that.
Yes. I've actually, I mean, it's really sad. 9 and 10-year-olds, I've had them, like, I've learned stuff from them. One of the examples, I've talked about it, Roblox. I never knew about Roblox, the game, until I went to a particular school and I sat down with a group of girls and they were telling me how there's chat rooms in Roblox where adult men and women are meeting kids, talking to them, and asking to meet up with them in the parks.
So
And
so for somebody like me, you have to explain what is Roadblocks. Is that an
so
app or
Roblox is an app. It's a
okay?
game where
Okay.
a lot of children, and the disclaimer is you have to be 13. But how easy is it to pick up your phone and it says, "Are you 13?" and you click yes. You could be 9 and
Gotcha.
say, "I'm 13." The disclaimer is you're 13. So it's an interactive game, and they have game rooms. It's supposed to be kid friendly, but there's avenues for traffickers that have that they've been utilizing the chat rooms. They have these chat rooms in the game itself, and some of the games are inappropriate. It's somewhat sexually explicit. I don't think a 9 to 10, 13-year-old should even be playing those type of games, like learning certain words and imitating sexual behaviors in the game. It it's it's like right in your face, and I learned that through these girls that the adults were, asking them to meet up with them in the park, like I said, and or wherever, like pretending to be um younger than they are, but still older than them, much older than them. I had a young girl tell me that she met her boyfriend in the Roblox game. She's 9. I'm like, what do you mean your
Wow.
boyfriend? So these are things that I've had to report to the school, because I don't know if their parents know, and it's not, I don't think about that if they know or not. It's something that they're telling me, and I report it because I just think that is so inappropriate. So I've learned a lot of stuff when it comes to those type of things through the younger generation, especially through the games, through the social media. I have social media, but there's still things that I still don't know about, and I've learned that through children. And this is the avenue that traffickers are using, because this is where our kids are 90% of the time. They're in Instagram, they're on Facebook, all these different apps and games. Is just like, it's crazy. And so they're taking advantage of the communication piece of these social media platforms. So yes, to answer your question, is I'm it's a work in progress.
Thank you. Appreciate you sharing that. It's so insightful. I mean, some of this is just stunning and surprising.
Yeah.
And maybe it shouldn't be. But just learning about this, wow. Uh, let's move into recognizing the signs, right? What are some of the key warning signs of human trafficking that community members should be aware of? And I want to kind of break this down too with community, because community is beyond just our neighbors. It's our families, it's our teachers, right? It's our caretakers. It's the folks who really, really are around us and who are grooming our lives and shaping our lives in any form or fashion. And how can we better equip ourselves to recognize when someone might be in danger? I'm gonna start with you, Jermika.
Sure. If I could take it from a couple different angles, just spinning off of it being trafficking being also prevalent, specifically sex trafficking, and exploitation being more prevalent online. That during the pandemic, we jumped like 98%. There was a report of 98% increase of online solicitations to our youth to be trafficked. And in Connecticut, where survivors, or excuse me, those who were impacted by human trafficking, youth impacted, were at home, predominantly in homes when they were being groomed and trafficked, right? And so when we think about that, we think, well, how does it look, right? In a home, it could even start with how are your kids responding? Do you see difference in behaviors? Do you see new items coming into your home, and you're wondering, where did my child get this information? Are you finding secretive information? Or I've even had circumstances where there's hotel key cards and things that have been found. Who are your children being with? Because even trafficking happens in the schools, peer to peer, where youth are trafficking other youth, right? And so what is happening in regards to who our children are involved with. But when it comes to that's the youth side, and I'm sure you'll jump in on that. I work generally with adults, and when it comes to adults being trafficking, some of the signs that I have noted and have been noted in studies is if you find someone never speaking, Someone's always either present or they are seeming subservient in nature, never talking or only speaking very rote behavior, like scripted behavior. That's a red flag, right? Someone that never has any money, but they work constantly. They even state, I'm always working, constantly working, but you see they are void of even basic necessities. It's not mathing. Math ain't mathing, right? So it's right. So it's like, well, what's going on there? And that's on the labor side and also the trafficking side. And some things that I have found as well is the description of what a boyfriend, I use a quote unquote boyfriend. When they describe a boyfriend relationship, the relationship is very seemingly flawed. It is, she knows nothing about him, nothing about his family, no details, when's his birthday, but he knows every aspect of who she is or he. It can be men or female. It is predominantly reported for women, but it's even when you have conversations with your friends and they say, I met this guy and he's wine and dining me and all these different things. And you're like, well, wow, he did all of that on the first date, or there's certain things that come up as red flags, and that could happen. But when you find these compound effects, when you say, well, where does he live, or where's he from, and they can't answer the question, or he starts isolating you from your friends, isolating you from your support systems, and sometimes that can be DV, domestic violence as well. So red flags does not mean trafficking. It's just it puts it on the radar to say what's going on here. And so those are just some of the prevalences that I've found. And even, there's a term that they call the blade when they're actually working. And it happens here in Connecticut where they are working outside doing sex exchange. You don't know if it's trafficking or if it is a prostitution, because there's a distinction there, right?
Right.
And we can talk a little bit more about that. But you see it, but you don't see it if you're accustomed to people standing there. If you're accustomed to a neighborhood where that's what they do. They just stand, they get in the car and they go and they come back, then you won't register that perhaps there is trafficking happening because you don't recognize that sometimes the streets call him the pimp. He's not, we call it trafficker to be appropriately stated. But the pimp, the streets see him as a pimp, but we don't naturally see it as a pimp in the community.
Right.
We see him perhaps as a drug dealer or the B-boy, the guy that's just hanging around, right? But not that he's trafficking somebody, not that he's plotting to traffic youth in schools. People say, where do traffickers, where are they? And I say, well, where do you send your children most what do you call it? Where they're alone. Where do you send your children to be by themselves? To the mall, to basketball games, to movies, right? Anywhere that they are not attended, rightfully so, to go and have fun or whatever, traffickers are.
Wow. I want to follow up, and then I'm going to ask you to chime in, Taisha, but I do want to follow up. You said something that stood out to me. Help us understand what is the difference between human trafficking and prostitution. They're both obviously very harmful, but I think for someone on the outside, they look probably very similar. So can you help us with that?
Sure. I'm sorry, did you?
No.
Oh, okay. So generally how we could think about prostitution is someone that says, I hold my own money, and they do. There's no third party involvement, right? She says, I have made a choice to do this, and she's over the age of 18. Let's be clear. And I use she just because it's common, right? She holds her own money and has made a conscious choice, statedly so, that she wants to do this, and this is her profession. It happens all across the country, right? That would be considered prostitution, right? But can I just do this disclaimer? I have never, ever met or worked with anybody, an adult that has been trafficked or even prostituted, that stated that they were doing it on their own, that victimization did not happen in their youth. Never. Either sexual abuse or trafficking happened. There's a seed there.
That led to that.
I will say, even professionally as my organization, I do not agree with many federal and state statutes that are saying they're legalizing prostitution. There are conversations happening in our country regarding that, because there are many that are fighting to say, I want to do this work and you all are prohibiting me and you're arresting me. But let's get to the core of, when did this start in your life, right? And so when we look at prostitution, that's what it is on paper. And I'm not an attorney, so you'd have to legally look at those statutes. But it is generally someone who holds their own money and there's no third party involved and they're over the age of 18.
Wow. Thank you for that. Taisha, I'm sorry.
No.
I want to give you an opportunity to chime in on recognizing the signs.
Yes, I wanted to go back to the youth aspect of what are some signs. A lot of times I've witnessed, even going back to detention, girls coming in looking one way, leaving and coming back and looking another way. Like their hair's dyed, their hair's cut off, they've lost a significant amount of weight. They look like they've been like sleeping on the streets. They haven't slept. A big sign is where are you getting these gifts from? We can't afford Jordans. You can't afford that jewelry. You can't afford that bag. Where are you getting it from? A friend. Those are big red flags. Those are big signs, especially in youth. Adults, young adults, it's a little bit different when you start to hit 17, 18. But when you're 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, coming home with that stuff, and you're just telling your parent it's from a friend, you're going to want to do some digging and investigating. So that's one big sign. I really don't like the word grooming, but you will start to see some significant changes. Like I said, the young girls were coming in with their hair, boldly, like red and blue, coming in with different colors. And they were telling me that this is a lot of the times the men were making them do these things to themselves to look different, to look older. So if you start to see those things in your children, boys or girls, because it's not just girls, it happens to boys too. Start having these conversations with them, because the gifts are not just coming from a friend. They didn't just see, they may have seen a superstar on TV and oh, I want my hair that color, but 9 times out of 10, when it's like a significant change, just like bold, like one day I want blue hair, or I want this, or I want that, it's coming from someplace. And
Thank you so much for that. Let's move on to socioeconomic factors and systemic issues. Socioeconomic conditions often play a major role in making individuals vulnerable to trafficking. Now, can you discuss how factors such as poverty and lack of housing and systemic inequities contribute to the prevalence of sex trafficking right here in our communities?
Yeah, I've seen, and I'm talking from experience working with youth. Adults, Jermika can definitely chime in with the youth. I've seen children feel like they have to, especially boys. I'm gonna touch on boys a little bit. The topic with boys, they feel like they have to take care of mom if they don't have a father in the home. So a lot of times you'll see younger boys have sex for money to help mom pay the rent. Mom will have these conversations with their children, not necessarily wanting their child to go out and do something like that with their bodies or anything like rob or steal. They're just venting to their children, but they're not realizing they're putting that pressure on their children, and the son feels like they have to be the man in the house, so they will use what they have, and they will use their bodies, and in return be paid, and they use that money and they give it to their parents so mom can pay the rent, so they're not evicted, so mom can keep the lights, can keep the hot water, can keep the gas, can keep the cable on in the house. I've seen that be a huge factor um in a lot of the homes, single parent homes, I should say. I haven't really experienced that with two parent homes. It's really single families that I have seen experience the poverty aspect, and um not necessarily, like I said, not necessarily telling their child so that they can go and do this, but just feeling like they want the child to know, and the child feeling like they have to take control of the financial aspect in the house. So it's very unfortunate when it comes to that.
Yeah. There's a statistic in the census, U.S. Census, that says 66% of Black households are head by a single woman. And that speaks into now, that doesn't necessarily speak that we are, just because it's a single family household, it's more likely that trafficking will happen. No, it's just
Yeah.
a vulnerability. We want to be clear on that, right? But
Right.
vulnerabilities present, it's not the fact that it's a single mom, but it's the fact that it creates time and space for children to be alone because mom is potentially working 2 or 3 jobs to make ends meet, right? It also is speaking to what type of and when you see statistics like that, a lot of times it's coupled with education and access to career mobility and places where you can make more money and obtain positions where you can actually make more money than working more, and that is susceptible in the Black community. And so then it creates this kind of it's systemic. It really is. It speaks into every socioeconomic need that we have as people. Housing, we need food. If you look at the numbers statistically, the Black and brown populations are always highly disproportionately affected. And so then it affects us when it comes to organized or unorganized crime. Because human trafficking is not always just gangs.
Right.
It can be, again, boyfriend, girlfriend type of scenarios, cousin,
Mom,
uncle, mom, dad, right? And so we have to be mindful of these vulnerabilities just based off the fact of color in the climate that we're living in, historical, and also breaking those normalities within the Black and brown community. That's key as well.
Well, let's talk about how. I'm sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you.
No.
Were you going to chime in?
I was gonna add to that. That's so true because I've
Mhm.
had conversations with some adult women, and a lot of them have said that their first trafficker was their mom, dad, or boyfriend. This across the board, and
Sad.
so
It's very sad.
Well, let's talk a little bit about how we break the silence and raise awareness. I think one of the major, we just talked about this before going live. One of the major challenges is that we're not talking about human trafficking enough. And why do you think that this issue even remains under discussed? And how can we, as the community, start more meaningful conversations to bring awareness and reduce this whole stigma attached to human trafficking?
I think a lot of areas that have been affected, the community says that doesn't happen here, so we're not going to talk about it. It doesn't happen in Greenwich. Doesn't happen in Fairfield County. It does. Every state, every county in Connecticut has had reports of human trafficking. Every single one. There's not one community there has not been any reports of human trafficking. So I think a big part of it is that if we don't see it, it doesn't happen here. There's nothing to talk about because it doesn't happen here, but it does. And I think it's somewhat an embarrassment for a lot of adults because it's the stigma that comes with it. Oh, my child would never do that. You know what I mean? Like it's not your child doing it. They're being coerced to do it because of other factors. You can come from money. You can have two parents. It's other factors that play into that. Maybe your child has they don't have the ability to know how to build friendships and relationships with kids their age. So they stay to themselves. They look at that. They don't have friends. So they become vulnerable. Do they have two parents in the home? Yeah. Do their parents have money? Yeah. They're still vulnerable and they become a statistic, unfortunately. So I think they're not having the conversations because they're not necessarily seeing it and they don't want it to become a thing in their community because it doesn't happen here. But it does. Greenwich, it happens in Greenwich. A huge area is actually the Berlin Turnpike. There's money there. New Haven, it happens everywhere. So I think people are just afraid if they start talking about it, they're going to be, that community is going to be highlighted. That area is going to be highlighted. And they don't want that coming into their community because of who they are. That's just to say that. It's just because of who they are, where they come from. It doesn't happen here. And it does. They kind of push it under the rug because that's just not something that we talk about.
Right.
You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
Absolutely. You're going to say
Yeah,
something?
I found like my organization is a culturally specific organization where we serve the African diaspora. And the reason being is because we found in our conversations, it's the opposite of we don't believe that it's happening here. It's we know it's happening, but we're not talking about it. And that is because of stigmas, as you mentioned, taboo. We don't, what happens in this house stays in this house type of statement. And we take care of our own. We don't report necessarily. We'll deal with it in house, but we're not reporting this. That's why it's vastly occurring on the criminal side, vastly underreported on the service side. So you see higher numbers of people being criminalized or being stated to be trafficked, but then when it comes to report and follow through with supports and therapies and different modalities, it's very nominal. And so having the conversation to change narratives that have been taught hundreds and hundreds of years of being taught of we're going to deal with this ourselves, and the way that we deal with it, we challenge those narratives because that's how we change the culture of silence and the culture of lack of autonomy, of body autonomy and worth and value. And so having those conversations, particularly in the Black and Brown community, to say, and also distrust. Many in the Black and Brown community have been taught historically to distrust police services and supports. But this trafficking is nothing you want to try to repair or dismantle by yourself. Can I just say that? It takes a village to support someone that is at risk. I'll even say this and I'll hush, but even when our children are runaways, can I say that? When our children run away, it is very important to not be so embarrassed that you will wait to call the police. Engage immediately. I don't care if this is the 20th time that they have run away. I want you to be the first person at that police department to state that this is happening and to not list our children as perpetual runaways. And I say that because when we list them as perpetual runaways, it decreases the instinct to go and search and look, right?
Yeah.
The longer that we wait, I remember a case, and I'll hush, but I remember a case where started, let's say I'm going to use, I'll use New York, okay? Started in Manhattan, right? First runaway. They find them in Long Island. Get them from Long Island back home to Manhattan. This third runaway is New Jersey. The fourth runaway is Virginia. What will you hear here? It's progressively getting further and further. We don't want to wait because, as you mentioned, I'm not sure what your replacement word for grooming is, but coercion. Coercion is real. The mind struggle with trafficking is real more than the actual physical violence because it's long lasting, right? It's with them even when the trafficker is not present. And so knowing that, having that in mind, is important for us to change the narratives and of we can do this by ourselves because we can.
Absolutely. I do want to make sure that we chime into our audience who have some questions coming in. So I want to take some time and be able to address a few of those. One of our audience members asked, what would you say to a young Black woman who feels she generally benefits from being trafficked by money, gifts, attention, and protection?
I think a big part of that I'm hearing that comes from self-esteem, ultimately. Because if that's it, I mean, what is the benefit of those things when it comes to yourself, your self-worth? As a young Black girl, you're sending a huge message to your trafficker and your peers. I would say to a young Black girl, I would ask the question, what is self-love to you? What does that look like? Take that stuff away. The jewelry, the nice bags, the clothes. Take that away. What else is left? What do you have in yourself? What do you What is your self-worth? Is that what you're saying, that's it? So anybody's going to be able to feel like they could buy you. Is that the message you want to carry for the rest of your life? Is that the message you want to give to your peers that I would think you would want to help? I don't think so. Because
self value and self love.
that's very important.
Absolutely.
Very important.
Jermika, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, there's two things. I I would go back to first of all, adverse childhood experiences, ACEs is real, right?
Yes.
We go back to our childhood sometimes. Sometimes we have to look at our behavior. We think our behaviors and the decisions that we make are literally predicated off of our intellect. This is my choice. Let's go back to the things happen in my life that may have affected how I handle things, or why I want money because I need to hold on to it just in case I never have it.
Right.
Those adverse childhood experiences could speak into how we perform our lives and how we move day to day. So I would go back and ask myself, when did I decide? Did I truly decide? And if there were no other inhibitors, if no one spoke this into my life, if no one introduced me to this, was this my first choice? I remember asking a survivor, if you were never trafficked, what were the things you wanted to do? And they stated, oh, I wanted to be a doctor. But now, do you want to be a doctor? Well, no, things have happened. Whatever. You can still be a doctor. What were the things that you perhaps dreamt of that you might not have access to due to the experiences that you had no control of in your youth? Go back and dream again. So that's what I would say to her. Were there ever any things that you were exposed to, or are you interested in, to kind of challenge your narrative? And if that's what you choose in the end, all right.
Go back and dream
Well, thank
again.
you for that. Like that. And actually, one of our audience members who posed the question said, thank you. Thank
You're
you
welcome.
so much for that support and that response. I want to make sure we get a couple more questions in. Another audience member asked, what would be the best way to provide support as a group practice, providing individual and group therapy? How do we reach this population to offer therapy?
I think it would actually be wise to get in networks of other therapists, like other therapists that are doing trauma-informed work, but let it be informed by those who are versed and experts in the anti-trafficking movement. Because it's one thing, trauma, yes, to understand trauma, but to understand the complexities of human trafficking that may come from experts in the anti-trafficking world. And so I would couple those two, especially if you're in practice, to connect with organizations that do the work with survivors, and then to you then also speak to their work, because the anti-trafficking movement needs that type of understanding from the therapy and healing modalities world as well.
Absolutely. Because 9 times out of 10, they're still going through it. And so that trauma is going to probably forever be a part of their life. So while they're in it, they're going to definitely need that trauma-informed support.
Absolutely.
For sure.
Yep.
Thank you. The next audience member asks, aggressive current laws and policies in human trafficking in our state, with a question mark. What can we do to make them better?
I actually have a note here I wrote down because a big part of like our laws, unfortunately, is the way that is worded. But I know in 2021 of June, the House Bill of Connecticut, it's a House Bill 6657 passed. It aims to combat human trafficking, but the way that it's written is that if a child is not looked at as a victim, if there's an exchange of other things aside of money. So if they're doing things in exchange for drugs, sex, whatever, any attainable things. If there's not money involved, a child is not looked at as a victim. And they're really working on the wording of that, because it doesn't matter what's being exchanged. It's being exchanged for sex. So whether they're getting a roof over their head, they're getting clothes on their back, it's still a form of exchange. And because it's not money, they're not a victim. That's not okay. So to answer that question, they're working. I know Miss Williamson from Love 146, they're working on trying to change the wording of that law, because that still stands. So they don't look at children as victims if it's other things in exchange if it's not money. So I think I don't agree with that, but that's where we're at with that. So,
Jermika, you want to chime in on that?
No.
Oh,
Nope.
okay. All right. Well, we're going to go ahead and close this out. And I want to talk about a call to action. A lot of questions came through from our audience members, and it was really a lot about how can we help and how can we make a difference, whether we're talking about individuals, organizations, policymakers, because policy is where it starts, and learning how to advocate. And a lot of times our community feels like we don't have that power, and we do, but I won't go on that soapbox right now. But talk about that, and let our listeners know how they can get involved and support these efforts to continue to combat and educate about human trafficking.
I would say one of the low hanging fruits for me is in Connecticut, it is required by law that all educational institutions that receive public funding get human trafficking training, and it is supposed to be by the curriculum that has been developed by HART, the Human Anti-Trafficking Response Team here in Connecticut. And so encourage your schools to get that training, to get that depth of training. That's one thing you can do in your own locale, right? But also connect, just like we have. We've heard about it, and we did our research as to who we can connect with. Either if it's legislatively with the TIP Council, the Trafficking Persons Council, if you want to get some laws moved and things shaken, right? Connecting with HART organizations, Love 146, the Regional Human Anti-Trafficking Recovery Task Force. It's here. I go to different places all across the country, and I'll tell you, there is more in this little state than a lot of larger states. And so it's here. Do your research, search, and have these conversations in your families and your locales or whatever it is that you're a part of.
I'd like to chime in. Me and Jermika are both licensed in HART. I have reached out to almost all of the high schools in Connecticut about what I am willing to do to come in to train their staff, parents. And I have had a low response. So I just want to put that out there that the resources are here. We're willing to come to your place of business, your organization, and train your staff and train you. There's a different training for youth compared to the adults. And I think the adults really need the educational piece of it. And so this is something that's here for you guys, and we are willing to come to you, to your school, to your organization again. So please reach out. HART is definitely huge. Love 146, they have the resources. Just reach out. That's what we're here for.
Thank you so much. And I'm glad you're talking about resources. For our online viewers in the chat, we will be listing multiple resources and how you can get in contact with these amazing women. I want to thank Shania Myers, Community Impact Coordinator, for being our online moderator, pushing these questions through. And I see all the comments coming through and the thank yous to our panelists. So again, an official thank you. Taisha Blue of Perfectly Imperfect and Jermika Cause of the Hummingbird Project. And thank you to all of our viewers today for tuning in to the YWCA Hartford Region Community Matters podcast, where the matters of the community are always the topic of conversation. Thank you and be well.